Dimmadel left the Witches' Club and walked from the school towards the portal to Moundsmine. As she did, she admired the view of the setting sky visible from the walls of Lobelia. The beautiful sight of a double-mooned purple, orange, pink and blue sky. One moon was a deep red contrasting through the more purple and blue Aries. The other was an iridescent rainbow of colors shining through rest. A sigh escaped her lips as she began mulling over everything she had to do. She decided a mental checklist would be the best course of action. 1. She had to talk to Alaray ASAP. 2. She had to have someone or someones to tail those suspicious characters she had overheard. 3. She figured the libraries of Moundsmine and LSU could potentially hold answers to those runes. And if they didn't, and she still wasn't able to get in touch with Alaray, then and only then would she consult the demon. Dimmadel finally reached the portal, and stepped through. Once through, she realized this was her first moment unaccompanied since her life as a princess, ironically enough. Youthfulness suddenly overpowered maturity in her, and she decided to take a stroll to see that horse that was bound out of the village in the next week. The walk was incredibly peaceful for Dimmadel. For just a few moments she felt as though she wasn't under so much pressure. For the moment she was a young girl, who wanted to look at a pretty horse. The stables came into her view and there he was. Ghostfoot stood facing her from the other side of the fenced-in stable. As though he were expecting her, she thought suddenly, unsure of where the thought came from. Ghostfoot whinnied and lowered his head as she neared him. Dimmadel reached out her hand and ran it down his flank, feeling the smooth short-shaved hair. Another sigh escaped her lips before she said softly, "You deserve better than to be somebody's carriage horse. A fine boy like you needs a good rider. Perhaps you've finally found your new one." Then she leaned her forehead against Ghostfoot, who let out a little puff of air from his nostrils, then seemed to nuzzle up to Dimmadel. She giggled, and held his head in both hands as she looked into his eyes. Then suddenly, she could hear a voice. It was that greasy archer, talking to one of the village guards at the gate. Dimmadel sneaked closer to the conversation, hiding behind a stone wall. "Now, Icard, you know the rules. No strung bows in the village. If there is a problem, it is to be left to us guards, okay?" The guard, a portly-looking middle-aged man, said. The grease man, who Dimmadel now knew was named Icard, looked exasperated, but unslung his bow in front of the other man. "Fine. Fine. Whatever, is that all, sir? Or can I be on my merry little way?" he said scathingly. "Not so fast. What's with the bag?" Dimmadel looked and saw that Icard was indeed holding a bag. It looked like it was made of a fine and durable garment. It was roughly half as large as the man carrying it, bulging out like a sack full of potatoes. "I was hunting, you know. Because I'm an archer?" The other man stood considering this for a moment, then shrugged and said, "Fair enough. Stay away from trouble, Icard. Don't think I won't have you in a cell if you don't." Icard had already begun walking off again, his now stringless bow in one hand and his other holding the bag over his shoulder, saying, "Yer, yer, yer." The guard shook his head and walked off in the opposing direction, towards the village gate entrance. Dimmadel looked back and forth from the guard and Icard. Then once she felt safe she wouldn't be spotted, she followed the oily archer. At first he seemed to be heading towards a bustling tavern at the centre of town, which caused Dimmadel to have to disguise herself. She cast a spell to make herself look about 4 times her age, a type of spell called a doppel that actually changed a person physically. In her new old lady look she followed behind Icard as he actually went past the tavern to a little shack that was tucked away behind it. In that moment Dimmadel remembered herself, who and what she was, and how reckless she was being. Restraining the sigh this time, she walked back to the keep, turning herself back to normal once she was out of any of the eyes in the village. She decided right then and there that if she couldn't find out on her own, she needed to move up her plans. Besides, it would be better to have this info for Alaray since she was the presiding monarch. She immediately headed for the council chambers to see if any of her personal guard was there. Indeed, there were two. Sir Slink was there, sitting in a chair with his feet kicked up on the table. He was conversing with Lady Passion about the intricacies of catching mice when she pushed his boots off the table and motioned for him to look. He turned and saw Dimmadel and stood up with a salute quickly, knocking over a half-empty tankard of ale onto the table. Lady Passion rose just as quickly. However, she did it so she could clean up the quickly spreading dark mass of liquid. "So sorry about that, my lady. How was your first day at school?" Sir Slink said quickly, eager to change the subject from his mishap as soon as possible. Dimmadel raised an eyebrow at him, but it was Lady Passion that kept her from mentioning it. She was looking at Dimmadel with a curious quirked head, her long silken blonde hair dipping to one side as she did. "My liege, is something wrong?" she said sweetly with concern. Dimmadel made what she hoped would be her final sigh of the day before she began. "Yes, as a matter of fact, something strange is going on." Dimmadel then explained all of what she had overheard and seen about the conspirators. She watched with half amazement, half amusement as Sir Slink seemed to visibly sober before her eyes, going from a relaxed stretch to a sort of perched crouch as he listened intently on his chair. His feet on the seat below him and his hands on his knees as his large yellowish eyes focused on her words. Lady Passion, however, altered from her serene and relaxed state to an outraged bristle, leaning forward with her hands also on her knees. However, she would take breaks as Dimmadel spoke to throw her hands up angrily at culprits of the supposed coup. When she was finished, Passion was the first to speak. "We must find this third supposed person, Gladys. And also figure out who that other female voice is." Sir Slink nodded his agreement and said, "And lucky thing you found out where he went. That gives a lead to follow. However, I think you should leave such dangerous work to me in the future. So, do you want I should follow this Icard fellow?" Dimmadel was just about to say yes she would, when Lady Passion interjected. "Wait, with the possibility of this becoming 3 against 1, perhaps Slink should have some sort of backup or accompaniment. I could pose as a tavern-goer as he investigates," she said excitedly. Dimmadel stood thoughtfully for a time before deciding that was probably pretty good counsel. And what was counsel for if not to be listened to? "Okay, that sounds good. I want them captured alive if at all possible, so we can question them and find out if there are even more involved," she said decidedly. At once her dutiful created servants got up and left to complete their new assignment. Dimmadel exhaled a breath of relief, feeling she had done good work with this decision. Then she headed off to the library to see if it held anything about the sigils. Inside the library she saw Lord Arklay was there, perusing through titles along a lower shelf. Dimmadel walked up to him and said, "Find anything interesting?" Lord Arklay sort of jumped with a bark-like huff and turned. "My dear lady, you startled me." Yes, a few interesting titles. However, I haven't quite plucked up the courage to crack any open yet. You know I used to sit and watch you and the masters read these books for hours. I listened to the stories that were read to you when you were small, you know. But it's hard to leave those dog-like thought behind sometimes, and I'm unsure whether I'd even like reading," he said, in a wistful tone. Dimmadel made a half-frown that suddenly turned into a bright smile as she had an idea. "Well, that's okay. I could always read them to you, then you wouldn't have to feel that way about it," she said cheerily. Lord Arklay's long and wrinkled face split into a toothy grin, with big canines showing. "Well, that would be wonderful. You always were my favorite of the masters," he said, then a quizzical look came over him before he said, "What brings you to the library, my lady?" Any way I can help you? Actually, perhaps you can. I need to find as many books on runes and sigils as I can. I have to help the Witches' Club decipher this strange object. She replied. Lord Arklay nodded and began walking to a different part of the library, further in than the front entrance zone towards the back. He stepped back to get a broader view of the shelves, then made a little R and stepped forward, plucking a pair of books that was side by side. One, she could see, said sigils and wasn't altogether too thick, perhaps an inch between the cover. The other said runes, and was roughly the size of a dictionary. Oh moons above, that's a lot of runes, she said, impressed, and also daunted. Oh yes, but should you finish with these I shall be setting any others that I think could help aside for you. He replied helpfully. Thank you, Arklay. I think that will do for now, she said with a little smile. My pleasure, princess. I mean my lady, he said, correcting himself immediately once he saw the alarm on Dimmodel's face. That's okay, sir. Have a good day. I believe I have some studying to do. Lord Arklay waved her out politely and she left the library with her new books in hand, headed to her room. Once there, she sat at a grand nice oak desk there and opened the Book of Sigils, which was titled. It was full of common sigils and the different ways to use them as you travelled by roadside. Ways to make brooms and carpets fly and levitate, how to make a wand in a pinch, make clothes into invisibility gear and more. But there was only one sigil that she recognized from the artifact, a line with a squiggle that ran down it to make it look almost like a spring or a screw. In its description it claimed this sigil was used commonly for teleportation, but the costs of the materials to inscribe the sigil were rather hard to acquire. Apparently it had to be written in fresh blood, but not just any blood. It had to be the blood of a very powerful undead creature.